It took me a while to get the Nintendo Switch. I felt that the beginning game lineup was somewhat weak with the exception of Breath of the Wild, and then Sword and Shield came out to middling reception and many freak lies, and then the issue of Joy-Con drifting came up, making my decision to hold out on my purchase that much longer. It took until the release of Animal Crossing for me to finally cave in and buy a Switch. Well, actually, a Switch Lite, since it was $100 cheaper and the Joy-Con thing still seems like a meh gimmick to me. But the reality is that the absolute dark age of the Wii U made me anxious in putting any hopes on another Nintendo console, as well as being unconsolably butthurt about my experience as a less than proud Wii U owner. Back in the olden days of the Wii, I had a grand time playing Twilight Princess, Brawl, Mario Galaxy, and all the other classic Wii titles. I really got a lot of good hours out of that little white vibrator. Of course, as an upstanding adult man-child, my favorite console is still the GameCube, but the Wii era was still pretty fun. I'll never forget all those hours, hearing Coconut Mall music as the lanes reverse, and I drive up the wrong escalator and my dick explodes in righteous anger. All those days of practicing the most efficient way to trip in Brawl with Meta Knight. It seemed like the fun would never stop back then. We were all so young and naive. But of course, all good things must come to an end. After some years of reliable service, one day my Wii stopped reading discs. Pain.
Misery. Desperation.
I would never again experience the nuanced intellectual gameplay of Brawl. This is what I felt. I've been on for too long, since I also had a PS3 and also had a blast with that, especially since by the end of that gen a lot of great games came out for it, but this is a video about that. Anyways, after a lot of time as a dedicated Sony shill, I eventually realized that I would need to get the new Nintendo console if I wanted to play the upcoming new games that Nintendo was teasing, like Mario Kart 8, Wind Waker HD, and Smash Bros. For Wii U and Tiger Connect. I eventually gathered all my hard-earned money from college loans and got a Wii U to finally catch up again with the console side of Nintendo gaming. At first, I felt I had made a good purchase and was happy, but it's only now that I'm older and wiser that I realized this was an abusive, toxic relationship I was in. What started out as Nintendo's newest gimmick console would quickly spiral downwards into a
dark era of unimaginable cruelty.
Alright, enough fucking around. Just what was the Wii U anyways? The Wii U was a psychological experiment by Tokyo University to see how cruelly a company could treat its fans, as it continued to pump out bland products for $60 and continued to promise support, even in the face of near certain calamity. To understand the philosophy of the Wii U, one must first observe the name itself. It's fucking stupid. This has to be one of the worst names for any product I could think of. There are so many issues right off the bat. I know a ton of people and parents that thought the Wii U was like a tablet accessory to the Wii or something, and didn't understand why it was so expensive. Others thought it was an updated model or that it was an optional add-on, but that the Wii could play Wii U games only to be dismayed as their goodly and sanctified Wiis refused to acknowledge the wretched and malodorous substance of a Wii U optical disc. So even here in the branding stage of this thing, we have major issues. The clearest problem in my eyes, however, lies in the very concept itself. For this latest gimmick, they decided to outdo themselves yet again by foregoing a traditional controller again, and sticking to a two-screen setup where you switch between the TV and gamepad in order to emulate the vision of a chameleon. Seriously, think about how mind-blowingly stupid it is to even think about gaming while switching screens constantly. The DS line did this well already, but nope. This time, the separation between screens isn't a few millimeters, but like a football field away. You have to swivel your head around more than a giraffe with vertigo to even play the fucking thing. All this does is create a headache for not only the player, but also developers. Making games is already difficult enough, but imagine being a developer looking at the Leapfrog controller setup and thinking to themselves, yeah, let's not bother with this. as they wisely skipped making a version of their game for the Wii U and focused on making something easier to work with, like the PC or TI-84. Naturally, this led to the Wii U receiving fuck all support from third-party companies. And although I've talked about how bad an idea the controller was, the Wii U still supported Wii remotes and their own new Pro controllers, so then this begs the question,
what was the fucking point of the second screen then?
If the main concept behind the project was to show how different screens could showcase different parts of a game, yet the majority of games mostly didn't really interact in any meaningful way, there's a huge fucking disconnect between the screens, making switching jarring and obtrusive. In most games made later on in the system's lifespan, the gamepad is basically just ignored outright or at most is a glorified menu. The few good exclusives that I can think of, like Game & Wario and Wii Party U, that actually use the gamepad in cool ways, are very few and far between. I love Wind Waker a lot, okay? Like, a lot. The most noticeable thing about the remake isn't the gamepad menu, but the faster sale and streamlining of quests. Yeah, the menu is nice, I guess, but really, I never had much of an issue with it, and I would kill for a remake on the Switch so Wind Waker Portable could be a possibility. Basically what I'm saying is that 99% of the Wii U's library could be much better served on another console. And weirdly, that kinda did end up happening with the Switch. Which, by the way, was yet another reason I didn't buy the Switch as quickly as others. Since I made the genius decision to purchase a Wii U, I'd already played like 99% of the new system's library. Well, except on a much worse console with a fractional user base. There are still some exclusives that Nintendo has decided not to port over, however. How come we haven't seen a Star Fox Zero port? Wouldn't this newer generation of gamers also enjoy playing Star Fox while developing a migraine? Actually, let's talk a bit about Star Fox Zero since it exemplifies so many of this godforsaken system's flaws, but also Nintendo's issues at the time. The use of the gamepad was a massive hindrance to the gameplay, rather than a welcome innovation. You have two different views basically, cockpit view and a behind the R-Wing Star Fox 64-like camera. The cockpit view is on the gamepad and has better, more accurate aim, while the TV screen shows you what the fuck is even going on. Since you can't aim too well on TV, it really means you're constantly switching between looking at that and the gamepad. Since you can't play too well, it really means you're not having a lot of fun, and just get annoyed. And since you can't have too much fun with it, it really means that years later, you are so upset about this development that as your life wastes away and you're unemployed during a global pandemic, you choose to spend your time making a stupid fucking video like this just to try and process your emotions, years after suffering mental collapse from a billionaire company's dumbass decisions. The graphics are bad. Yeah, I know Nintendo isn't really about graphics, but this generation in particular versus the PS3 and 360 was, well, bad. The price of a Wii U really wasn't that much lower than their competition, and yet most of the games look like diarrhea. I typically don't care about graphics too much myself, I mean I'm a Pokemon fan for God's sake. But, Star Fox Zero was actual N64 polygon shit. Well, except Star Fox 64 actually had good gameplay. Yes, there are some games that looked okay, but in reality, I think the graphical leap between the Wii and Wii U was tiny. It makes sense if the graphics would be limited by the fact that you need to show them on the gamepad as well, but
again,
I'll bring up the fact that this innovation was an unneeded hindrance at best, and certainly not something to limit yourself to. And again, let me stress that I'm not a guy that needs to have the highest renders for the nipples in Skyrim, but I also think that it's highly idiotic to assume your consumers aren't going to compare the different consoles and see the price points and notice that you could get a whole lot more bang for your buck with something else. Nintendo was on a fucking sales high after the Wii's financial figures came in, so perhaps this explains their hubris, but let's just go over the final overall problem
to discuss right now.
During this gen for them that's also present in Star Fox Zero. Hubris. If Nintendo knows one thing, it's nostalgia. They know their neckbeard army of Nintendrones will buy anything that even has a hint of boomer pheromones. I sincerely think that they could sell overpriced plastic toys to grown men that aren't hentai figures, so long as it says Zelda on the packaging anywhere. Now, if Nintendo does one day decide to sell Zelda hentai figurines, then they'd be able to retire pretty much off that alone. But anyways. It's very clear that Star Fox Zero was trying not so much to emulate, but pretty much replicate Star Fox 64 in every sense except,
Gameplay.
I mean, even the graphics are spot on. But to think that you could sell an overpriced, underpowered console with a shitty gimmick solely on the basis that people remember fun Star Fox games is sheer hubris. You can sell tiny cum tribute statues to men since they're not too bad on the wallet, but a $300 console plus a $60 game just to experience Next Train Simulator is just too much. You can't count alone on the fact that you have existing IPs that no matter what you do, sales will generate themselves off the back of nostalgia. Nintendo's financial documents during this time period show that the Wii U era was catastrophic for them in terms of hardware and software sales with the exception of 3DS stuff. Yep, eventually I found myself like many others, really enjoying their 3DS and its extensive library, while the Wii U gathered dust particles, well, except when I wanted to play Wii games on it. Weirdly, while they did indulge in a lot of nostalgia baiting, they kept fucking it up during this era as well. I swear, Metroid Force Fed was created solely for spitting in the face of Metroid fans, just like Amiibo Festival was made to flagellate Animal Crossing fans for our sins. Enough about the past though. What about new properties during this era? Let's see, in terms of big new IPs, what did the Wii U bring? Yes, Splatoon and... that's it, I think? Really, this is the big boy of this era, so let's talk about this one for a little bit. Of course, what the tiny Wii U audience wanted was a shooter. Cartoony and wacky, but at the end of the day, Splatoon is still a strategic shooter game, not that dissimilar from a bunch of other popular games. Yeah, the gamepad gyro could actually work in fun ways with shooters, but I'm not sure I could think of a more distant population of gamers that Nintendo could go for at the time. It was clear that while they still held the keys to our nostalgia chastity belts, they were also heavily leaning into the casual crowd. The FPS crowd is not exactly known for being the most casual-friendly environment. So, the commercials Nintendo ran at the time always showed
kids having fun,
parents being there to protect them from all the furry smut posts on Miiverse. I think the FPS and FGC communities are some of the most hardcore crowds out there, so they probably saw these and the Wii U as a baby console for kiddies to mess around with. Well, maybe the FGC community wouldn't mind that part as much. Okay, let's wrap this up in a nice little bow. The Wii U was a stupid console designed by people so blindly focused on innovation for the sake of innovation that they lost sight of their own market. After the immense success of the Wii, Nintendo rested on their laurels, fully expecting everyone to accept their latest abortion as the worthy successor to one of their most lucrative pieces of hardware. The genius gimmick this time wouldn't so much put you in the game like motion controls tried to do, but rather cause hernias and cervical disc displacement. There were some good things about the Wii U that I could discuss, but nah, I don't wanna. This video was made with absolute anger and regret that I paid money for a shitty console that would eventually just have almost its entire library of decent games ported to a future one, while simultaneously being worse than both its competitors and its own predecessor. This video wasn't really made to sway anyone's opinions and was more a cathartic shout into the nether, but I would like to point out one final thing. The ending year of the Wii U was a pathetic thing to see. Nary but a scant bit of third-party support was to be found during this time, and the final kiss of death was Breath of the Wild itself. A great game to be sure, but the fact that the Switch release was the real one said all it needed to say. They prematurely cut off the Wii U's legs in favor of accelerating the introduction of the Switch earlier than Nintendo had anticipated, and now here we are. Sony and Microsoft are introducing their new consoles, while Nintendo is actually doing pretty well, but only after suffering tremendously after a prideful fall from grace. Now, after all this, we can breathe a sigh of relief as Nintendo looks forward to this brave new world with its head held high and having learned absolutely nothing. The end.